I'm here with Miss Heather MacDonald of the Manhattan Institute. Heather graciously agreed to speak at a PRI luncheon in Newport Beach. Heather, your last book, The War on Cops, provided a rigorous analysis of data showing that it's crime, not race, that drives police actions and prison rates. Your new book, The Diversity Delusion, is similar in that it debunks the race victimization myth on university campuses. What was the genesis for this new book?
Well, the genesis, Rowena, was both sorrow and rage. I was fortunate to be in college in the 1970s before multiculturalism hit. So while I wasted a lot of time on a very crazy literary theory known as deconstruction, I still was allowed to read the greatest works of literature without anybody thinking to complain about the gonads and melanin of the authors. I regard that as one of the greatest privileges to have been able to spend 4 years immersed in sublimity, beauty, wit, profundity. In the 80s, long after I'd left college, identity politics started raging at a ferocious level, and students were taught that they could dismiss authors simply because the skin color and sex did not match themselves. They were given a license for ignorance. Faculty have been given the greatest job in the world to curate these great works and teach students why they should be down on their knees in gratitude before them. They have been either tongue-tied and silent before these outbreaks of ignorant student know-nothingism, or are actively encouraging that sort of ignorant attack on greatness. So I'm deeply sorrowful that our obligation to keep our culture alive, to pass that inheritance between one generation to the next, is no longer being followed. And I'm also furious that people that have been given, the faculty that have been given such a great privilege, are abusing it.
So you got a front row seat on the hysteria happening on campus when you were invited to speak at Claremont McKenna College here in California. Please talk to our listeners about your experience there.
Well, I've been invited to speak about my book, The War on Cops, which argues that the Black Lives Matter narrative is completely false. We are not living through an epidemic of racially biased shootings, police shootings of black men. And I bear witness to the fact that in high-crime inner-city neighborhoods, the good law-abiding residents there are desperate for more police protection. They support the police. So I want to push back against what is, in fact, a very dangerous narrative, because it resulted in another 3,000 black lives being lost to rising crime when the police backed off from necessary proactive policing under the weight of this false narrative. Well, a few days before I was supposed to show up to give my talk at Claremont McKenna, a call went out on Facebook to shut down the racist, fascist, Islamophobe, homophobic, white privilege, misogynist Heather MacDonald. The students announced that Heather MacDonald will not have a platform. So it's apparently up to students to decide who gets to speak and not. When I arrived on campus, I was brought into what was in effect safe house. I could hear the chanting and drumming growing louder and louder. I couldn't see it. It was outside of my range of vision, but it did put me in mind of what it must felt like be an aristocrat of the French Revolution, where you hear the mob gathering force and you don't know what it's going to do. You know, obviously there's huge differences there, but it's one thing to read about student hysteria, and it's another thing to be its target. So I was escorted through a secret passage into the auditorium where I was supposed to speak, not having seen or known that at that point about 200 students had surrounded the auditorium to prevent anyone from entering. The police, of course, were completely feckless. They stood down. They allowed the students to take over. They'd been given an order not to intervene by the campus authorities. So I gave my talk to an empty room. The students outside were pounding on the plate glass windows and chanting and drumming and shouting throughout. Finally, the law enforcement who were inside the building decided that they couldn't guarantee my safety any longer, and I was escorted out through the kitchen into a waiting Claremont police van and taken to the department.